Wow, Sony's really pissing people off these days. First, they decided to completely close off the stores of their older consoles and handhelds, and while it is possible for you to re-download the games that you bought, most of them anyway, it's impossible for you to buy them again. I talked about this in my last video. Then there are the news behind the scenes talking about how their gaming management has totally gone nuts, making really stupid and asinine decisions like remaking The Last of Us for the PS5. That's right, a remake for The Last of Us on the PS5, which is on the top of the list of things that nobody asked for, only second to a live-action adaptation of a beloved cartoon. Sony has lost their minds. They're completely out of touch with their audiences and consistently make backwards decisions after backwards decisions. Thanks to Sony closing off their stores, they have successfully ditched around 2,000 digital-only games and prevent the public from buying them or consuming them in any of their previous consoles. So what's the solution that we have to do when Sony or other game console companies ditch their legacy this badly? Thankfully, we have several actually, and we're going to talk about it in this video. We're going to talk about emulations, jailbreaking, custom firmwares, and homebrew applications. I have a PC, obviously, a laptop technically speaking. The specs are listed right there on the screen. It's an Acer Nitro 7 AN7-1551 with a Core i7-9750H, a GTX 1660 Ti, and 32GB of RAM. This is the laptop that I use primarily for not just playing PC games, but also playing games through emulators. With this particular specification, this laptop over here can run emulators up to even PS3 games. That's right, PS3 games. We'll get to that in a bit. I also got a 1TB super slim PS3, which was already hacked. The next one is a Nintendo Wii, which is also already hacked. And finally, I got a 3DS, which was also already hacked. I'm gonna explain to you what I do with all of those old consoles, the custom firmwares, and the homebrew applications that I have, and what you can do with them. As for modern consoles, while I do have the Switch and the PS4, they are on the latest firmware updates, and I'm still not confident in hacking them. So I'm just gonna wait until their lifespan is over, or when certain vulnerabilities are open to them. Oh yes, I also got one more. I'm gonna be talking about my Android phone. Why? Because we're gonna emulate some games in it, and you don't have to jailbreak your phone for that. The Android phone that I'm using right now is the Samsung M51. Unfortunately for all iPhone users, I'm not too familiar with an iPhone, nor am I interested in using an iPhone, let alone purchasing one. You can emulate your games in it, but you're gonna have to go somewhere else if you want to know how you can emulate games in there. Now keep in mind that this video isn't really a detailed step-by-step tutorial per se, because I'm not really that much of an expert. This video is more of a guide and overview of how I do it so that you can at least get the picture of emulation, jailbreaking, homebrew, custom firmware, etc. And most importantly, what you can do with all of these things. If you want to check out step-by-step tutorials on how to jailbreak your consoles or find ROMs of certain games, there are loads of them on YouTube and Google. This video is more about how I do it so that you can at least get the picture. So don't consider this a detailed guide for your needs. Consider it a general overview and also some tips and tricks that I learned along the way and how I do all of these things. Also, I'd like to inform you all that I'm not too active in the YouTube comments because the notifications on that is garbage. So if you have any further questions, you can message me on any of the social media links that I provide on the screen, or you can check them out right down below. I also stream every week at Saturday 7 p.m. Eastern Time in both YouTube and Twitch, where we do a 2-hour Q&A session for whatever stuff you like to ask. So follow me or subscribe me there for more info. Also, you can donate to me through PayPal, Patreon, Streamlabs, etc. Links down below. Let's start with the least complicating setup. Emulating games on a PC is easy, or at least to me. The PC has emulators for loads and loads of platforms. You name the platform, you can probably emulate it on the PC. This applies to Windows, Linux, and even Mac to some extent. It can even emulate other operating systems through the use of a virtual machine, or a VM. Pretty much all of Nintendo consoles can be emulated on a PC, including the Virtual Boy. Yeah, the Virtual Boy has emulators for all sorts of platforms if you're into that sort of thing. That being said, their most recent ones like Chitra for the 3DS, Cemu for the Wii U, and Yuzu for the Switch are still on development, so not all games are gonna run perfect on them. You can check out their websites on whether or not the games that you want can run well on it. It's usually on their compatibility tab. Now, I'm not gonna cover all of the emulators here. I'm just gonna cover the one that I use and the all-in-one solution called RetroArch. RetroArch is an all-in-one emulation front-end software that lets you to emulate pretty much almost all games from many different platforms. All you need to do is to download RetroArch, install the software, download the specific platform that you want to emulate or cores you want to install, and then load the games that you want to emulate. I'm not going to tell you how to get the games, you're going to have to Google that one yourself. The amazing thing about RetroArch is that it's available for all sorts of platforms. It's not just available on the PC, it's also available for the Mac, Linux, Raspberry Pi, Android, iOS, Xbox, PS Vita, all sorts of platforms. Unfortunately, while RetroArch is a really nice all-in-one solution, it can't do everything, or at least the recent stuff. So try RetroArch only if you want to play old console games or old handheld games, or if you want to turn your Xbox Series S into a retro gaming machine. Personally, I'm more old school with my emulators, and I prefer to have individual programs that I can configure instead of an all-in-one package. So let's start off with, in my opinion, the easiest one to emulate. This one is PPSSPP. A very awkward name to say, so I'm just gonna make it even more awkward and call it the PP. Despite the awkward naming, the PP is actually among the most neatly designed emulators that I've had. The UI is sleek and smooth, there are loads of customizations, you can rebind the controls to whatever you like. It's a pretty damn good emulator. The PSP games are usually on an ISO format. ISO, in case you don't know, is basically a disc, except it's in the form of a file. In case you missed it, PSP games are usually contained in UMD discs. All you need to do is to put the ISOs of the game on a specific folder, browse through the folder in the PP, okay, I'll stop, and run the game from there. It's simple, straightforward, no nonsense, and it's PSP, so it can run on almost anything with a GPU these days, especially if the game isn't that graphically intensive. Heck, if your phone is decent enough, you can have this PSP emulator on your phone, as PPSSPP is also on Android and iOS. As for finding the ISOs of the game, I'll leave that up to you. The next one is Dolphin. The Dolphin emulator allows you to emulate GameCube games and Wii games. Emulating GameCube games is a pretty straightforward process. You just put the games on a specific folder and make sure that Dolphin read the games off of that folder. The game should be in an ISO format because most GameCube games are disc-based. Like all emulators, you can bind whatever controllers you have into the settings menu, the game should run just fine, and it should be a pretty straightforward process from there. Unfortunately, while Dolphin can emulate Wii games, I'm only using it primarily for GameCube games. It's not that Dolphin can't run Wii games, actually a lot of Wii games can run just fine on Dolphin. It's that the controls are gonna be a problem, considering that the Wii uses the Wiimotes and the nunchucks and all of that. There are unfortunately only a handful of games that are supported with the Wii's classic controller or the GameCube controller. You can check them out on this page, I'll link to it down below. Now there's nothing stopping you from buying Wiimotes yourself. I actually bought a couple of Wiimotes and some USB infrared sensor bars for really cheap, and you do need the infrared sensor bars so that your Wiimote can get detected. Since this is a USB sensor bar, I can pretty much connect this one anywhere, including a power source, as long as the thing turns on. In real life, you're not going to be able to see the infrared lights coming out of the sensor bar. If you want to see it, you're going to have to use a camera. Even the one in your phone works. The next step is to connect the Wiimotes that you have into the PC, but it is such a bothersome process, and even if I got that connected, I always have issues where the Wiimote would just turn off out of nowhere and disconnect me from the PC, and I just simply cannot reconnect back into the game until I restart Dolphin. The Wiimote constantly disconnecting from my PC is the one reason why I bought a Wii instead. We'll talk more about the Wii soon. Now let's talk about the PCSX2. At the time of the video, the latest version is 1.6. Initially, you're gonna need the original PS2 firmware or BIOS files. You're gonna have to Google how to find them yourself. All you need to do is to select the games, which are usually dumped in an ISO format, and just boot the game. You can actually choose boot full if you miss the PS2 boot sound. The thing about the PS2 is that every game has different configurations that work well for some, but not for others. Some games can run fine using the OpenGL renderer, but others will lag. Some games can run fine using DirectX 11, others won't. Intel CPUs work well with a GS plugin that uses AVX2 instruction sets, while Ryzen works well with the SSE 4.1 instruction sets. Some games require their own tweaks that will make them run better, look better, etc. So, while the PCSX2 is compatible with nearly all of the PS2 lineup, different games will have to use different settings. Not all of them, but some of them. There are loads of settings to tweak on PCSX too, and they can be rather intimidating to people who don't know what they're doing. Heck, I don't even know what a lot of these words mean. Thankfully, it's not that hard to search for the fix on the internet, and PCSX2 has its own dedicated wiki and community for almost every game for your particular configurations. And finally, we have RPCS3, a PS3 emulator. If you're wondering how I got to play NieR Replicant on 60 FPS in my last video, even though the remastered version isn't out yet, RPCS3 is the answer. RPCS3 has progressed far enough to the point where almost 60% of the PS3 games that they have on record are playable at the time of this video. That is actually pretty freaking amazing. The developers constantly and regularly update the emulator to the point where I can go on for barely a week and they'll have a new update. And you should update because it's great and every new update offers more and more fixes. So what kind of hardware do you need to run these really intensive PS3 games? Well, the answer is, it depends on what games you're playing. Persona 4 Arena and Arena Ultimax are just 2D fighting games and they'll run pretty well for the most part. NieR Replicant runs incredibly well on my PC. I even have a patch that would allow me to unlock the frame rate. If you don't know how to install this patch, right click on the game that you want, click Manage Game Patches, download all of the patches, and you should be able to just check that option. There are, however, some games that just don't run very well. If you want to check on whether or not your games can run on the emulator, the RPCS3 website has a compatibility database where you can search whatever games you like and it'll tell you exactly on how well it runs on RPCS3. It also has a wiki detailing on the issues that certain games suffer and how to fix them. Oh, and stay tuned for the PS3 section because there are loads of tips that I want to share that can also apply on this emulator. Now let's move on to Android emulators. If you have an Android phone that is at the very least semi-capable of playing games off of the Play Store, then chances are it might be able to run emulators too. As I said before, the phone that I have at the time of this video is a Samsung Galaxy M51. This is, in my opinion, one of the best mid-range phones in the market right now. It's outfitted with a Snapdragon 730G, 8GB of RAM, and a 7000 mAh battery. 7000 mAh! That's 2000 mAh more than an S21 Ultra. Now yes, in the Android we can just install RetroArch and call it a day, but again, I'm more old school with my emulators, so I have individual apps for every platform that I want to play in. The first one is DraStic. DraStic is a Nintendo DS emulator that I use a lot. How it works is you get yourself the ROMs of the DS games that you want and you transfer them into a folder in your phone. Then in DraStic, you just need to browse to where you dropped the games and just boot them off from there. Plain and simple. The same goes for pretty much every other emulators I have. I have MyBoy, which is a Game Boy Advance emulator, ePSxe, which is a PS1 emulator that is also available on the PC, and PPSSPP, which is the same as the PC version, except it's on Android. All of these are available on the Play Store. They're pretty cheap. You can buy them there to support the developers. But wait a second, isn't playing on the Android kind of awkward with the touchscreen controls and all? Yes, it's pretty awkward with the touchscreen controls, unless if you're playing Ace Attorney. So can we play with a controller instead? Yes, absolutely. There are loads of Android controllers out there that you can buy. I have the Super Famicom-like controller from 8-bit though called SF30 with a phone holder attachment that was sold separately. It works okay, but if your phone is heavy like mine, there's an uneven weight distribution and it can be uncomfortable to hold. You can actually use a DualShock 4 controller on your Android. The DualShock 4 uses Bluetooth to connect, so you can hold the share and the home button at the same time until the controller blinks rapidly. In your Android, you can just connect the controller through Bluetooth and you're done. You can even buy a phone holder attachment to the DualShock 4 too. Whatever options you chose and however you're gonna play them, your Android phone could be a very capable emulation and gaming machine. It depends on the game and what kind of things you want to emulate, and of course how strong your phone is. You might be able to get away with emulating GBA or DS games or old school Nintendo or Sega games, but PSP games would probably require a little bit more CPU and GPU power. And now we'll get into the consoles. First off, I'm gonna talk about the PS3. The PS3 that I'm using right now is a super slim version with a 1TB hard drive inside it. So hold on a second. Why do you have a PS3 when you can just emulate the games on RPCS3? That's a good question, and let me answer why. Because there's still a couple of games on the PS3 that are not very playable on RPCS3. The infamous series is well, infamous for this. The games are either glitchy, unplayable, or cannot be finished on RPCS3. There's also the original Red Dead Redemption, which, according to the compatibility list, is not playable yet on RPCS3. You also have the Metal Gear Solid games like the 4th game and the collection as well, that apparently doesn't run very well on RPCS3. So, until Konami makes a PC port to the entire thing and get their crap together, your option of playing these games in HD lies in the PS3. So yeah, those are the games that warrant me to buy a PS3. That, and they're pretty cheap. I got this one already outfitted with a custom firmware for about $180, and that includes lots of games already. The super slim PS3 is running a custom firmware, or more accurately a hybrid firmware, called PS3 Hen. Hen means Homebrew Enabler, and what it does is that it allows you to install custom and of course Homebrew PS3 applications. If you are interested in hacking your PS3, and this also works with the super slim version, which are notorious for being unhackable, you can check out this ultimate guide to hacking your PS3 right down below. Do follow the guide carefully or you might get your console bricked. If you already hacked your PS3, don't follow the guide, stick with the firmware that you got. I prefer using a hybrid firmware like Hen instead of a dedicated custom firmware like Rebug, because I don't use that much homebrews other than Multiman anyway. Hen doesn't offer a lot of customizations, but it's a lot easier to manage, at least to me. So what's with these homebrew applications? What can these applications do? Well, you can install a bunch of tools that let you to manage the PS3 and install games like Webman or Multiman or Irisman. You can also install tools that let you manage some settings in your custom firmware. You can install emulators like RetroArch. You can also install a tool that deliberately triggers the DualShock 3's vibration so that you can use that to stimulate yourself. No, really, there's a homebrew out that lets you do that. I use the PS3 to play PS3 games, or at least the kind of games that are still unplayable on RPCS3. If you already have a hacked PS3, then chances are you should have Multiman installed. Multiman is essentially the PS3's file manager. You can use this homebrew application to install PS3 games in there, or you can use something like Irisman, but for now, I'm gonna show you how to use Multiman. You can install them by copying it to an external hard drive or a USB drive, or by transferring it through LAN using FTP, which is the method that I prefer because I already have the console hooked into my router and the transfer speed is pretty good. PS3 games are usually contained in two formats, an ISO disk file, which is more compatible, or a folder, which is commonly referred to as JB. While I mainly use the JB format, I sometimes have to use the ISO format when the console simply can't read the game, which happened to Resistance 1. The problem is, I got Resistance 1 on a JB format. In order to convert it to ISO, I need to download this tool called PS3 ISO Tools. I'll link to that down below. It'll basically convert your PS3 JB file into an ISO file. The instructions on how to convert the JB to ISO is already included in the PS3 Hen hacking guide that I already linked down below. And here comes the problem of ripping off PS3 discs. Physical copies of PS3 games usually come with the earliest version, so whatever bugs or glitches that were patched along the way, they are not contained on that disc. It's totally fine if game updates are still downloadable on a PSN, but what if they aren't? What if PSN game updates are broken to the point where you can't download them? It already happened to a bunch of people recently, where they decided to download certain updates of certain games, and it failed. So what now? Here's what I'm gonna show you a software called PSN Stuff, which you can download, link down below. In PSN Stuff, go to a tab named Game Updater and type in the game ID into the search bar. If you want to know your game ID, you can use the RPCS3 compatibility section. Type in the name of your game and they'll be there. Just keep in mind that if it starts with N, it usually means the digital copy, and if it starts with B, it usually means physical copy. After you put your game ID, PSN Stuff will give you a list of all the updates that you have to install for your particular game. The updates will be packaged in a PKG format. You can use these updates to update the games on your RPCS3 or update the games on your PS3. For RPCS3, it's pretty straightforward. Just click File, install PKG, select whatever PKGs you like, and they'll install it for you. As for the PS3, make sure you have the PKGs ready. Prepare a USB drive that is formatted in FAT32 because that's what the native PS3 can read. After that, create a folder named Packages in your USB drive, put all of the PKGs that you downloaded inside the folder, and install them all on your PS3 through the package installer, which you can find right here, and then here, and then here. It's really that simple. Now, with PSN stuff, you can also download themes, DLCs, avatars, game demos, and even full games in a PKG format. You do, however, need a database from PSNDL, which will be in a CSV format that you have to rename to database with no file extensions. And if you want to install full games on there, you do need the license files too, or the so-called RAP files. Not gonna show you how to do it in this video, you're just gonna have to search a guide on that one yourself. So once I get the games, I transfer the games to the PS3. You can use a USB external hard drive, but I'm using Multiman and FTP for this job. FTP, in case you don't know, is a file transfer protocol that uses your local area network, or LAN. Essentially, I just use LAN to transfer the files. The PC is connected to a router, and the PS3 is connected to the same router, and therefore the same network. So do the math. Going back to FTP, I have to activate PS3 hen first. So to activate it, I just select enable hen. Once I did that, Multiman should already enable FTP. If it hasn't, then I'm just gonna enable it right here in the settings. So I just open up FileZilla, which I'll link down below. You can use whatever FTP softwares you like. I'm using FileZilla. In FileZilla, I type in the local IP address of my PS3, which you can find there in the Multiman XMB menu. And there you go. I got access to my PS3 folders on my PC. All that's left to do is to send the games into the PS3. Either I send it to the games folder if the games contain in a JB format, or I save it on a PS3 ISO folder if the games contain in an ISO format. The thing is, FileZilla can sometimes suffer from errors if you're transferring huge chunks of files. Thankfully, someone already made these custom settings for FileZilla that lets you to transfer lots and lots of files successfully, so you can follow that. I'll link to it down below. Ah, yes, the Nintendo 3DS. This handheld is actually pretty good, all things considered. I bought this one about 2 years ago, and after playing it for a while, I legitimately thought it was broken because it couldn't detect the games on the SD card. That is, until I turned it back on again, and it's actually working just fine. This 3DS is already pre-installed with a custom firmware. All I need to do is to update everything inside it, and now it's running just fine. Better than fine, actually. I can now connect to the internet and update without worrying about bricking the thing. Yes, I'm aware that the 3DS already has the Chitra emulator on the PC, but personally, I just like the idea of me having a portable console like the 3DS to be brought around. The Switch is a portable console too, but it's a bit too big for my liking. Whereas the 3DS is a lot smaller and nice enough to carry in a man purse. Not to mention, the 3DS has dedicated buttons, which makes it more comfortable to play games compared to an Android's touchscreen buttons. They're not perfect, but physical buttons for gaming will always trump touchscreen any day. Thanks to my 3DS having a custom firmware, I can also install homebrew softwares like emulators, so that I'm not restricted into 3DS's rather limited library in my opinion. Thankfully, most 3DS are hackable, and they aren't that hard to perform if you haven't done them already. You can check out the many guides on the internet and how you can do so. I'll link to the one that really helped me in terms of additional final steps and other stuff down below. So the question right now is, how do I install 3DS games in there? Well, it's a little bit complicating. There are two file formats that you need to keep in mind, 3DS and CIA, not to be confused with the government organization of the same name. The 3DS files can be read by the Chitra emulator, but if you want to play them on an actual 3DS, you need to have them on CIA. To convert a 3DS file into a CIA, you need to have the game inside the SD card of the 3DS in a specific folder and convert it using God Mode 9 on your hacked 3DS. You can do this on the desktop, but it requires some files from God Mode 9 anyway, or files from Bootstrap 9 firmware. It's complicating. Just Google it yourself. Personally, converting it in God Mode 9 works for me. You can transfer the files through many different methods. You can open the back of the 3DS and take out the SD card, or you can use FTP. While the FTP is slow because I can only connect the 3DS wirelessly into my router, at least I don't have to open the back and eject the SD card and plug them in again and again. So at least it works alright, and that's what's important. So now that you got the CIA file in the 3DS, you can install the game through a homebrew software called FBI, not to be confused with the government, etc, etc. FBI is a file explorer on the 3DS that allows you to install any forms of CIA files into the 3DS. Once you install the files, they usually come in a present, you open the present, and voila! Your game is installed. A lot of the homebrew applications also use the CIA file format to package their softwares. So if you want to install emulators or other homebrew softwares like Checkpoint, if you want to cheat your way through a game, you have to install install the CIA files through FBI. Why does that sound like a government scandal? And yes, you can install emulators there too. You just need to have all the ROMs transferred in there so that it can have games to load, obviously. And that's about it for the 3DS. Let's move on to the final one. This is the latest console that I got because my PC doesn't like the Wiimote. Nintendo Wii. Surprisingly enough, there's still loads of these at stock, and I swear these things are sold in clearance because they are ridiculously freaking cheap. I got one Nintendo Wii that has already been hacked, one Wiimote with Wii Motion Plus and a nunchuck, one 32GB of a flash drive that contain a bunch of games, one HDMI adapter, all of that for $55. I'm not kidding. $55? It's a great freaking deal. Battery's not included though, but that's not hard to buy. And thankfully, the Wii is as good as new. It works just fine with zero issues. Everything runs pretty smoothly. I can load the games just fine through the USB loader app, but I can only run it at 480p though, because that's the maximum resolution that the Wii can handle, which isn't really that bothersome to me as long as I can play the games just fine, and I can. The one thing about the Wii is that it still uses the old RCA cables to transfer audio and video data. Anyone who grew up with old consoles knew about these cables, and they're not exactly compatible with HDMI, unless if you buy yourself an RCA to HDMI adapter. Thankfully, the vendor that I bought the Wii from also sold a Wii to HDMI adapter that lets me to connect the Wii to my capture card or my TV. So if you're getting the Wii, make sure that your TV can input RCA or have HDMI adapters ready. As for how you can hack the Wii, you can check out this guide right over here. Just make sure you have an SD card ready, micro SD card when an SD adapter is also fine, and a USB stick to put all of your games in. I did try to hack it myself, and the one method that works for me is the letter bomb method. That's the method that lets me to boot into the Hack Me software. So choose whatever method that works for you and just follow the guide until you can get a hacked Wii. So how do I install the games? Well, it's a little bit complicating. You see, the Wii games can only be recognized by the Wii if they're in a specific file format, and that file format is WBFS. Some Wii games that were dumped on the internet will be on either the ISO format or the nkit.iso format, and let's be very clear here, they're actually different. If you just so happen to find a Wii game on an nkit.iso format, first you have to download the nkit app with all of the Wii partitions in right there, all the links below as usual. Then once you do that, you run the application and you find the Wii games that you want to convert into ISO. Now, while that's enough to run the games on Dolphin, actually Dolphin can run nkit.iso as well, if you want the games to run on an actual Wii, you're gonna need one more additional step, which is to turn the ISO format into WBFS. To do that, you need a software called Wii Backup Manager, which is, just as the title says, it will back up your Wii games. You can convert the Wii games that you want into WBFS and also download the game covers and disc cover into it too. Once the games are converted into WBFS, you can transfer the games into the Wii. So how do you transfer the games? Well, you can take out the USB stick on the back, plug it into your PC, and transfer all of the games that were already converted into WBFS into the games folder on the USB stick. The transfer speed is fast, but you do have to go back and forth between the Wii and the PC. Oh, and yes, you can load the games in an SD card, you just need to use the Wii Flow Loader app. You can also use FTP. I haven't installed the FTP Homebrew app yet, so let's install that, shall we? The app is called Wii Explorer, which is a file explorer for the Wii, and it can also do FTP. I need to transfer the app into the Wii first through USB and put it into a folder called Apps. After that's done, I can run the app through the Wii Homebrew channel, which is a really catchy music. Anyway, once that's done, I can just run the File Explorer app through the Homebrew channel, turn on their FTP module, and transfer whatever files that I want in and out of it. Plain and simple. While you don't need to go back and forth between the Wii and the PC, the file transfer with the FTP can be very slow, so pick your poison. After the game is installed, I just use whatever game loader that I have. I can either use WiiFlow or CFG loader. They'll find the game there, and all you have to do is to select it. There you go. Plain and simple. And that's pretty much it for my emulation and homebrew setup. It's quite a long journey from one point into another. Lots and lots of B-rolls and game footages and screen recordings that I have to do, but it's ultimately worth it because I actually ended up having fun making it. And that's what's important to me. It's how fun it is making all of these videos. Now it's time for me to play the actual games. And before I close this video off, once again, if you need any help, you can contact me on Twitter or email or any other social media, links down below. You can also support this channel even further through PayPal, Patreon, whatever you like. The links are also down below.